Yes. If I'm forgetting something, feel free feel free to chime in and remind me. But thank you for reminding me, Chris. All right, and I will make this this available for a week after this for everyone else. So I encourage my students to ask questions. I think it'll be great to hear from both of these artists um, who are currently working in industry, but I have to say also, we're once students just like you guys. They were students of mine at the Art Institute of Pittsburgh. Um, and so I think it'll be great for you to hear just, well, they know what it was once like to be a student, and also they've done a really, really good job, I think, of making the transition into, the professional world, and they've been working in the professional world for a while now. So I thought I could, we'd start off with just a few background questions, and then we can move into more of an open forum. And we have about 45 minutes altogether. So I just want to just quickly again introduce them. This is Sean and Dani Kruse, and then for you guys, we're joined by mostly my students from an intermediate game art class. Some other game design students who are doing independent studies with me, and then some of our faculty in our major, Jeff Wormuth, Britt Snyder, Tobin, I think the faculty that are with us now. So yes, without further ado, let's see. I thought, well, I can just give you just a very quick brief. Sean just worked at Visceral Games and with EA on the Battlefield Hardline series, and now at Naughty Dog. And Danielle has worked as an artist and concept artist at Gaia Interactive, Pocket Gems, and now Nyx Hydra. So I thought if you guys want to maybe just talk about your careers so far, the companies and games you've worked on, what areas of production you've worked in, and maybe how your career has evolved.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
Yeah.
You want to go first?
I was going to say, do you want to go
first? All right, I'll go first. All right. Yeah, so you summed it up pretty well. I started off by going to school at the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, which was, wow, 9 years ago now. I started in 2008 and graduated at the end of 2011. While I was in school, I started off by doing a bit of freelance work, and I worked for a outsourced studio called Liquid Development for a while, which was pretty interesting. And also, outsourcing studios are a really good option for students. It's generally a little bit easier to get into rather than a AAA studio, and they have such a wide variety of projects that you can work on. So I started off working for Liquid Development, and then after graduating, I moved out to California for a full-time job at a studio called Tryon Worlds, where we worked on some MMO titles. After that, I did a bit more freelance before heading to EA, working at Visceral, where, like John said, I worked on a bit of the Battlefield Hardline series. And then we moved on to a Star Wars title. I worked on that for about 2 years before, unfortunately, that got shuttered and canceled. After that, I went and tried out a smaller studio to see what that would be like. And I went to Outpost Games, which was a startup founded by a bunch of ex-EA developers. And a short while after that, I moved into Naughty Dog, which is where I've been now for like the last 2 years, almost 2 years. And yeah, I think that's about it.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Thank you.
For me, right out of school, I actually went into or got a job at an ad agency that was there in Pittsburgh. I was kind of a jack of all trades and just doing all of the grunt work, but it wound up working out really well because I was able to save a lot of money. And then without any jobs lined up, I moved to California. I don't recommend doing that. I was only able to do that because Sean already lived out here, so I had someone to like move in with and like had friends here while I got my foot on the ground. But I also kind of had some luck because at the day I was moving, I got offered a job for freelance work, so I at least had something to do while I was here. So I did some contract work for Gaia Online for a little bit. Some of you might not know what that is anymore. It's still around, but it was more from like the early 2000s, like a message board with a bunch of pixel art avatars. I worked for them for a little bit, then got hired in-house. I managed a few different projects for them. And then after that, I got hired at Pocket Gems. They are a mobile studio in San Francisco. I worked on episode there and some R&D projects. And then after that, I went over to Nix Hydro, which is a startup here in Los Angeles. They work on interactive novels like the Arcana, but I'm working on something different that I can't tell you guys about, but it's very cute. And there I am a lead artist now. So I do a little bit of everything, actually. My team is only 4 people. So I get to do UI, art, some design, implementation. I lead contract artists. So I art direct everything. Yeah, everything. So.
Nice.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
I think I didn't actually mention what I do, which might be useful. So I'm an environment artist, and I started off when I was doing freelance as more of a prop artist, I guess you would say. When you work for outsourced studios, it's rare that you'll do a lot of full environment work. Outsourcing studios is mostly the main studios working on the game in-house will contract out all sorts of stuff that needs to be done, but can be done. It doesn't need the in-house expertise. So in-house will generally focus on level layout, level design, anything that's crucial to gameplay, the big picture sort of stuff, and then lots of smaller props, all that sort of thing that generally doesn't affect gameplay will go to outsourcing studios. So I started off more of a prop artist, and then once I moved in-house to Tryon Worlds, I transitioned to being a full environment artist, and I've been an environment artist since. But as I've progressed through my career, starting at EA and especially now at Naughty Dog, it's more of a focus on texture art specifically. So I still do a bit of everything, but the main focus is texture art, shader art, and that sort of thing.
Can you talk a little bit, Sean, about just what that involves, like in like maybe like a particular day's work or a getting a particular, I don't know, job or item done, like what in both a creative and a technical sense, like what, because I know we talked before this a little bit about how there's kind of a new or relatively new way of doing texturing and materials, and can you go a little bit into that?
Yeah, so over the years, and like we had talked about a bit before this, like you mentioned, when I was in school, environment artists pretty much did all the modeling and texturing themselves. And over the years, as certain disciplines become more involved and more complex, they'll begin to branch out into their own disciplines. So when 3D games first started, environment artists did everything. They did modeling, they did texturing, lighting, effects, pretty much everything you would see visually. But as lighting became more complex, now you have lighting artists, so they can focus solely on that. And the same thing over the last few years is happening with texture art. So with the introduction of PBR over the last console generation or so, physically based rendering, texturing itself has gotten more complex. It has more rules. It has more nuance and technical skills associated with it. So because of that, studios are finding that it is worthwhile to have artists specifically focus on that and dedicated to texturing pipelines. So Naughty Dog itself has been known for a while as being a studio that has split their environment artists between modelers and texture artists. And that was pretty unique for a while. They were a bit ahead of the curve as far as adopting new texturing techniques, such as using Substance Designer and things like that. And it's becoming more and more standard now, and that is in part because of Naughty Dog. When I was at EA, we had started splitting the teams from modelers or general environment artists into modelers and texture artists, and that was a good reason for that was just trying to emulate Naughty Dog, because their environments in just art pipeline in general was so good. And you'll see that all over the industry now with these big AAA studios. If you go looking for jobs, you'll see specific job postings for texture artists or material artists or shader artists or someone who knows physically based rendering or someone who knows Substance Designer. So yeah, now that I'm at Naughty Dog, that is my main focus. And what we do is we have our group of environment artists split by modelers and texture artists, and then they will pair them up. So I have a partner at work, my modeler, and they will just give you a section of a level, or they will give you an assignment or like a certain area to work on. And one of the cool things about Naughty Dog is the amount of freedom and ownership they give you, which is a lot more than other studios I've worked at and other studios I've heard of. They really leave it up to you to make a lot of the decisions, and a lot of the responsibility falls down to you, since we don't really have any producers, which is a bit unusual. So once we're given the section of a level, we'll talk with the designers, we'll talk with concept artists, the art director, anyone who's involved with or has a stake in the visual goals for that area. And once the modeler takes a pass on it and starts kicking over art that is either fairly well along or done, it will come over to me, and then it is my job to plan out and execute what kind of textures will be used on the level, how they're going to be used, what kind of shaders we need, how we can reuse things to keep things optimized and within performance standards.
So are they essentially giving you like an untextured level or scene, and then you're working from that, or I guess it just depend? And then also, are you trying to, because I was looking at some of the materials that you created, these very kind of impressive, detailed materials. Are you making decisions in terms of like, okay, how am I telling the story? Like, okay, we're going for this type of wall, and this is sort of, I don't know.
Yeah, so when a level comes over to us, depending on the stage of production, will determine what state it comes over to us. Early on in production, it is mostly grayscale or gray box environments. So the designers are the ones who will lay out a level initially, in most cases. So they will sort out gameplay and anything they need for like pathing and AI and essentially anything to do with gameplay, and they will create the level solely just using boxes and primitive shapes. And for the most part, those will have some sort of gray box shader on it. We have every studio is different. Our in-house gray box shaders are a little more complex. So it'll just be like checkerboard shaders, but we'll have basic properties on it as far as like collision and sound effects and stuff goes. But when it's kicked over to us, it's really just looks like a bunch of like Lego pieces stitched together. And then working with the modeler, we'll take that and start arting up the level. So either using the gray box as a base for custom unique models and turning like a big box into a building or cars or vehicles, like whatever it may be, or starting to replace those with assets from our library that are shared across the game. And if it's gray box and custom and everything, then it is up to me to decide what textures need to be created to match the visual goals or the concepts for that. You'll usually be given concept art to work with right off the bat. And then I'll take that and I'll gather some additional reference to go along with it, which I would say is one of my biggest tips in general. Always work from reference, no matter what. Always work from reference.
Interesting. So you mean like just like research that you like images that you find for, or I'm just curious. What are your go-to or places that you like to look for references?
You'll become really good at Google image searching is the main thing. So even if you get concept art, getting additional reference, and the same for like the stuff Danielle does too. She's always looking up reference for like her character art stuff and her the outfits she has to do concepts for. Because if you don't work from reference, even if you think you know something really well, there might be little details missing, or like if something wasn't included in a concept, you can fill in the gaps with reference. If you don't work off real life reference, something to the viewer will always seem off, even if they don't know what it is. So it can help. There's so many like concepts are never perfect. Concept artists are busy too, and a lot of times they'll just go for mood or the feeling of a space. So it's up to you to really fill in the gaps and sort out the details of it.
So really, like I guess like this world building and the sense of world building. Actually, that is an interesting point that I think Dani, last time we had I saw you guys at GDC. You had talked a little bit about like. I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about your work at Pocket Gems. I thought that was kind of an interesting, it was sort of like sounded like a niche game. And maybe you could talk a little bit about what that was and the kind of, what Sean was talking about in terms of like looking up references and getting ideas. I think you were saying for like costumes and accessories, is that?
Yeah. So actually for both Gaia and for Pocket Gems, the primary focus of doing concept art for them was for outfits for characters to wear. And both of those had it so that the users and the players could also customize their character. So being able to give them a library of not just clothes that look good to you, but clothes that are actually fashionable that people would want to wear, even if it's not something you like, just to make sure that you cover all your bases. But when I was at Pocket Gems, the episode specifically is a visual novel kind of app, but they also have an editor, so you can write your own stories in it. It's mostly geared for like 13-year-olds. So making sure to keep up on trends of kids and like teenagers was very vital. Thankfully, I already have an interest in things like fashion, and that's just also stuff I like to do on the side myself. So it wasn't too hard to do or look up references for that. But finding references for everything, it has always been very important to me, not just for the sake of making sure that I know what I'm drawing or looking at, but also just for keeping up to date in my case, just because it was fashion. It's also just good to know. I mean, in my years of doing that specifically with working on outfits, I've learned a lot about like the different cuts of clothes, and I know lots of weird words now that I never knew as just like that like the fashion industry uses. So it's been like a lot easier to talk with things like outsourcing, because most of the art in actually all of the art really in episode is outsourced. We just have concept art. We just had concept artists in house, and then everything would get outsourced. So being able to know exactly what you were talking about, not just like, oh, like that kind of one line over there on the side. Like you could tell them exactly what that seam is called and where it is placed, and they'll know exactly what you're talking about. So very important to use reference. If anybody ever tells you using reference is cheating, they are wrong. Do not listen to them. Please always do it.
Yeah,
I know so many random architecture facts. It's bizarre. Like I know just from the years of reference, just all the kind of stuff that you learn as you're looking this stuff up. Like I could tell you how to like build a brick wall and plaster it, but I couldn't actually do it. But that kind of stuff is over the years, as you look up reference, like she said, you just build this library of knowledge that is really helpful to just, you constantly just know more and more, and you can build upon that, and it helps out when you're creating things.
Yeah, it also helps out with like your own speed too, because as you first start using reference, right? You won't have much of your own internal library. You might think you do, but you don't yet. And then the more you use it, you do wind up building a pretty good library yourself. So things get a lot easier for you in the long run.
Yeah, I think actually that's really excellent point that you guys are making, because I think that people, one of the big reasons people want to play games is so that they can experience something, something new, something different that they wouldn't already, and like having confidence in the authenticity, right, and the completeness of that other experience and world is really important. So like it makes sense that you guys are in the process of building these things. You become sort of like experts in these very arcane areas. I think that's like that's really that's an excellent point. It makes a lot of sense. Well, so I think this is probably a good time, maybe we can open it up, now that we have a little bit of a sense of what you guys do, to questions for both of you, from students or faculty, or also if there's any other points you guys want to make. So does anybody have any questions? Christian?
Yeah, Dani, you mentioned earlier on that your role was in the jack of all trades category, and Sean, it sounds like you specialize more. I would be interested to know what your experience has been with the parts of your skill set that you've focused on. What if being good at everything has been more useful than putting all of your time, like what skills had you spent your time practicing that ended up paying off?
That's my same question.
So for me, my specialization is concept art, and it is what I do at every single job I've had. It is my primary focus. The difference between Sean's like career path and mine is that he works at big studios and I work at small studios. If you work at a small studio, more often than not, you're going to have to do everything. Not because like, oh, you're good at everything. More so, there's no one that knows how to do this. Can you kind of learn really quick? That's what happened to me recently with UI art, because we don't have a UI artist in house and I'm making a mobile game. So I had to learn how to do UI really quick. But I would like the reasons I've been hired at places have always been because of my specialization. And then the other things that have come about have only more so been because of the fact that I like to learn. I like to do new things. And I have a lot of just good people skills. So that goes a long way.
Yeah, I remember. It's interesting. I remember when I was in school at the Art Institute, I actually had to fight a little bit against our portfolio requirements. I don't know if you remember this at all, John, but I talked about this with Gabe a lot. When I was in school, the portfolio requirements were a little dated. So in order to graduate, I was an environment artist. I was already doing paid freelance work to create environments, but my portfolio required me to make like 5 full characters and have like 10 animations and like 50 concept art pieces. And I had to kind of...
It was like different scored thing, right? There were like
Yeah.
different things, and you had it like had to all score up above a certain score, I think, right?
Yeah, so I kind of fought back a bit, against that a little bit, because it's like, this isn't really how the industry works anymore. Unless you are mainly focused on, like Danielle said, these really small studios are doing your own thing, then you have to know how to do all these. But if your goal is to get into like a mid-size or a AAA studio, I think a good way to go is to specialize a little bit more, at least at first. That is the best way to get into somewhere.
Yeah.
Once you're into somewhere, being able to broaden your skill set makes you so much more valuable. So my advice is pick a focus, whether it's environment art, effects, lighting, concept art, any of those things. Really drill down into that so you know that one thing really, really well, and use that as a way to land the type of job that you want. Once you're in that job, learning little bits of all the other disciplines makes you that much more valuable. So I'm a texture artist at Naughty Dog. That's my title. That's mostly what I do. But because I have a background in modeling and world building, I've done that at other jobs. And I'm also pretty technical, so I know a lot of pipeline stuff and tech art and optimization. That makes me so much more valuable to the studio than someone who only knows how to use Substance Designer, for instance. So that is always my advice, is really get really good at like the one thing that you love to do and is your main thing. And then from there, branch out and slowly like broaden your skill set a little bit more.
I should also mention that one thing, I mean, this isn't necessarily the case for every like concept artist, but most of the stuff that I do is 2D related. So my focus is 2D art, but then the other things that I branch into are also related to 2D. I don't ever touch 3D because I'm bad at it. I do once in a while to do concept art, and it's a struggle, and I asked Sean to help me, but that was one thing that I had a problem with also when we were in school, was being told to have all this 3D work in my portfolio, but it was like, I knew that would only bring my portfolio down because it's not what I'm good at. What I'm good at is 2D art. So I just only put 2D art in my portfolio.
Yeah, you know, I'm thinking back on it. I don't remember if we had many 2D art.
We did not.
Classes, right?
We did not. There was like 2. So,
but
yeah.
we had more like traditional. We had like life drawing classes. And
correct.
Like
yeah. Which I very much miss still.
And I'd say
really?
slightly related to what she was just saying. If your focus is concept art or 2D art or illustrations or anything like that, learning 3D is not a complete waste of time.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you right now, the majority of concept artists at AAA studios use 3D. Almost, yeah, all the time. All of our, and the sad thing is they're usually better at 3D than the 3D artists. So like I'm pretty sure all our concept artists, our environment concept artists at Naughty Dog, start all their pieces in 3D. So the difference is there is a big difference between concept 3D and production 3D. If you took the things that concept does to paint over top of, you could never use that in a game. It's a completely different skill set or mindset. And if anyone's interested, I can link some tutorials that one of our concept artists put out for how he uses 3D.
That'd be awesome.
It's a lot more free form and loose. They just try to get an idea, so they're not worried about will this run at 30 frames per second or 60, or will this blow our budget or anything. They'll go into like Modo or 3D Code or Maya, and they'll just like free form sculpt out a scene, get all their shapes, get their composition, and then they'll render that out with like a base lighting pass, and then they paint over top of it, and it's such a big time saver. So that's like that's example of what I was just talking about. They may have like focused on 2D art and everything, but broadening their skill set and be able to use 3D as a base to speed up their process just makes them that much better at what they do. Yeah, so totally still a valuable skill, even if 2D is your main focus.
That's good to know. We have a pretty our classes tend to lean towards giving you a pretty varied skill set, like keeping at least introducing everybody to everything. So that's interesting to hear. Thank you very much.
I think that's super important too, and I appreciate that AIP or the artists who did that. That was always one of my criticisms later in the courses at AIP, though. I think it could have
it should have branched out.
It could have started specializing a little bit earlier, and that would be my potential advice to other programs. Is like I think it's great at the beginning to give a look and taste into each discipline, because a lot of times when students start, they have no idea what they want to do. Or they think they know what they want to do, but they haven't experienced the other stuff. So like one of our best friends, Jeremy, who you know, John.
Yeah.
He started by doing environment art at AIP with us, because that was just like the default for 3D artists is like, oh, I'm an environment artist at the Art Institute. And I remember having discussions with him outside of the building, and he's like, man, I don't even know if I really like doing this. He's like, but I'm kind of liking these character art classes that we just started, which, by the way, I hated. I'm glad we had a character art class, because I was like, I know I never want to do this, ever. He's like, I kind of like doing this. He's like, but I heard it's harder to get a character artist position, so maybe I should just like keep making chairs and tables and props and stuff. I was like you should really just do what you want to do. Like just focus on what you want to do and really hone in those skills. And since then, he fully transitioned to character art, and he's been working at like big studios ever since, solely on characters. So it's great to get a look into every discipline, but I think once you really nail down what it is you want to do, you should focus on that. And it'd be awesome if like the classes or the class structure supported that a bit more, which I know is kind of hard. I don't know if there's a perfect solution for that, because it's not like you could just like create classes for only like 3 students or whoever if it's really specialized. But anything that could be done to support that would be cool.
Well, do you think, I mean, do you have suggestions for where students can, or artists can go to get that extra depth? Because you're right. I think on the one hand, we do, there is a certain amount we can tackle in school, right? But then there's also a certain amount that is just, I think that the individual artist and the student, they also kind of need to know also where those resources are. Like I remember, you were very involved in Sean, in like Polycount, even when you were in school, and looking at other artists' work, getting feedback, and kind of helping it grow. Would you say that's also kind of something
that is still probably one of the most important things you can do as a student, honestly. So like if you are just getting by doing only your classwork and that's it, like the bare minimum, you're putting yourself at a severe disadvantage. Me, Danielle, our friend Jeremy, our friend Max, who is the lead concept artist at Gearbox now, graduated with us. us and a few other students, we were always the ones at school after classes, like late at night in the computer labs, just like doing extra work, doing extra practice, and like you said, going on sites like Polycount and other forums to learn from people who are actually in the industry. And even more so now, that is such a good resource going online. There are so many resources online, it's insane. Like from actual industry professionals right now, people out there doing this stuff who are putting out tutorials either for free or for really cheap. I'm still paying off my school debt, but now I can go on and get a class for like, I don't know, $30 or something like that. It's such a good supplement. So like school is great because you have the hands-on teaching from like great professors and stuff, and then you have all your classmates with you for the sort of experience of working with a team and working with others, which is a valuable skill. But then supplementing that by going online to forums like Polycount, using sites like ArtStation, seeing what other people are doing, going on an artist's like Gumroad page and getting some of their tutorials, just makes things, or just puts you that much further ahead than anyone who's just doing like the baseline amount of work or just their schoolwork or anything. Just going above and beyond is so useful and gives you such an advantage. And I can maybe list out or send you some links, John, if you want to like send it to everyone else after this.
Yeah, that would be great.
I'd appreciate that.
Yeah.
There is a question from Nicholas Pinton. So he asked, out of curiosity, what was the work environment like at the game studios you've worked at? I know there's a big difference between working at a major studio as opposed to smaller indie studios, and it tends to vary from place to place. But what was the general feel when working at these studios? For me, I've also had the pleasure of getting to work at primarily women-focused studios. So I've had the opportunity to work with teams that are almost, if not more than 50% women, which is amazing if you're a girl. It's pretty rare. But for me, working at smaller studios has tended to feel more like a family almost. And I don't mean that necessarily as in the best way always. That also means lots of bickering, lots of people with opinions who won't stand down because there's not really one person to always say, okay, this is how we're doing things and this is what your assignments are. But in that regard, you do also get a lot more ownership. I mean, Sean gets a good amount of ownership at Naughty Dog, but that's again pretty rare. Whereas for me, it's like I have a producer, but because there's only 3 of us on my team, the whole studio itself is like 20 people. But on my team, it's a lot of like, what are you going to do today? And I can just say what I'm going to do, pretty much. But for the most part, it's a nice environment. And feels like a family.
That's good to know. Yeah. Yeah, I noticed. Actually, I was reading a little bit about your current company, Nix Hydra. It sounds really interesting. It was founded by 2 women, right? And yeah. Can you give a little bit of background on the company and what it does? Or?
Yeah, sure. So Nix Hydra was started by 2 women. They are no longer there, but the 2 of them started this just because they wanted to focus on women in games. Originally, they had just done more of like games for young girls. So there was like this game called Egg, an Egg Baby, that was really popular with young girls for a while. It was really just like, here's an egg, dress them up, and like that was it. But then they did the Arcana, and it was kind of like they were running out of money. And it was like their last Hope, and the Arcana has done really well as a visual novel. So now they are focusing on doing more like that. So they just created Fictive, which is a visual novel platform that they're just going to put a lot of visual novels on instead.
Hmm.
I help with manage the artists for that. I don't do any of the art on that, but I help with the contractors. And then the other game that I'm working on, I mean, I guess I can say what the name is. We've got the trademark. It's called Potions, Please. And it's just going to be a resource management game. So they do a little bit of everything, kind of. It's more so just, what do you guys want to make? And Potions, Please was actually the original pitch for that. I wasn't the person that pitched it. I wish I was, but it was when Animal Crossing Pocket Camp came out, and they were like, "We want more games like this on mobile." And obviously, Animal Crossing is amazing. So that's kind of where that stemmed from. But all of the things that they try to do there focus solely on what is the genre of games that the women demographic would like to see, so we can give them that. And the easiest way to reach most of them is through mobile, because I mean, there are women that game, obviously, but a lot of women that are not or that are more like casual or like mom gamers. It's usually through the phone or through mobile. So.
Okay, thank you. Looks like we just got another question, I think, from Britt. Could you talk about what a recent hire artist portfolio that would look like at Naughty Dog when they specialize to model only / not texture and production on the job? Would a portfolio of untextured models be something that would be of interest to Naughty Dog for someone looking to break in initially?
Yeah, I can answer that, and I can go back and answer Nicholas's question after this then too, because I have some experience with both of those. So recent hire artists portfolio at Naughty Dog. Let's see. I would say, so even if you're applying only to be a modeler, I think they would still like to see full environments. And that's the obviously their focus would be more on looking at how you construct your models, how you make use of your vertex count, how you assemble your composition, and all that sort of thing. Anything that would be mainly related to your job as a modeler. But this goes back to us saying of how Naughty Dog likes people with who can still help in other areas, and they would still like to see full environments. So that would include textures, materials, lighting, that sort of thing, especially because lighting is so important in games now and really helps sell a scene, and it can also be used in terms of gameplay and stuff like that.
Thanks.
So
oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry to cut you off. No, continue, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, especially now that lighting is so important and can even be used for gameplay, even if you're not going to be the lighter in a level, which at Naughty Dog you won't be. We have our own dedicated lighting team. Knowing how to model things and lay out your composition to work well with that lighting to help support the gameplay or the storytelling is really important. So that would be something that they look for in your pieces, in your portfolio. So they would absolutely not, like, if they looked at your environment and they're considering hiring you, they would not be like, oh, well, those models are really good, but the lighting isn't that great, so that's a no from us. Like, they obviously still focus on what your main job would be, but they like to see full environments. And then I'm pretty sure that the art test they give you, because Naughty Dog gives everybody an art test, I'm pretty sure the modeling one does not require textures. So that specifically, they don't look for textures. But in terms of your portfolio, they would want like probably full environments or pieces. But yeah, go ahead. What were you going to add to that?
No, that answers the question. I was just wondering, basically, if they had a portfolio of box models with no UV mapping or maybe like automatic mapping set up on it and no textures, would that, even if the models were great, would that be an issue for them as a hire?
I think it would.
I-
It's hard to say because I actually haven't seen too many portfolios like that where it's only gray box models. I am leaning towards the thought that they would prefer to see fully realized models so you understand the UV process. Because even though as a texture artist I do most of the UVing and stuff, a lot of times it's my modeler will do like a base pass on UVs, or he'll go into our library and apply just like general shaders and stuff to like help speed up the process and help balance the workload. So I would say lean towards more finished, fully completed models. But really, if you're trying to be a modeler, just put more of your focus on that is what I would say.
I
That's really
do.
helpful. Thank you.
I do want to add to that because I have hired a lot of artists in the past. They are not necessarily 3D related, but looking at lots of portfolios, if you feel like, should I do this extra bit of work that might push it towards something more, do it, because there are so many other people that are going to that have the same skill sets as you, but they went above and beyond and you didn't. That's how it's going to come off. So if the question ever comes up like, oh, should I also do this, just do it. Like, just do it. It'll be better for you in the long run, either because A, it gets you the job, or B, you learn something more, because practice, you will always learn something.
Yeah, if you're doing an art test, always, always, always do more than what they ask you to do. Every time. That is one of the most, like, that will put you ahead of so many people. Like, just right off the bat, that'll put you ahead of so many people. Even if you don't get the job and your art skills aren't quite there yet, they will remember your portfolio as like, oh, they did like so much more than what they asked us, or like, with the one caveat, as long as it doesn't take away from the base task that they ask you to do. If they said like, make a house, but then you made the entire level, but the house sucked.
Yeah,
like,
don't do that.
That takes. But if you like knock out like a really solid house and then you do like an entire level around it in like a cool story, or like you do, so like for my Naughty Dog art test, they give you some models and the brief is essentially texture these. That's it. I made a whole scene in Unreal. I knew that Houdini is becoming a big part of the industry, so I used some Houdini skills to like show that I knew how to do that. I wrote like made up like a 10, 12 page PDF that I submitted with my test of breaking down the entire process. So like you can show them your thought process and what you think of. So just anything you can think of to show that you have more skills, or like a broader skills than what you're just applying for, and B, to show that you like really care about what you're doing, will put you ahead of everybody else. And then
Great advice. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say this is semi-related to your question about the portfolios, but from the other direction. I just want to bring this up because it's been a big pet peeve of mine recently. Danielle knows because I always talk about it.
Oh, I know it's going to be.
So coming from the other side for texture artists, there's been a trend recently of people specializing too much and becoming too obsessed with things like substance designer and not learning anything else. And we've run into issues with that even at Naughty Dog when we're like trying to finish a project and we hire on like contractors right out of school or something to just like help speed up production. And they will label themselves as environment texture artists or a texture artist. And their ArtStation page is literally nothing but just material balls with substance designer textures on it. And then they'll get into the studio and realize like, oh, I have to use Maya too. Or like, I have to know how to unwrap things. Or like, I have to do anything outside of substance designer. And it's just like, they don't have those skills yet. And we had some major issues with that, where it was partially on us for just assuming that people had these fundamental skills. But so I'm a texture artist at Naughty Dog, but I would say maybe 15-20% of my time is actually spent creating textures from scratch. The majority of my time I'm inside Maya, unwrapping things, UVing stuff to trim sheets or materials. I'm vertex painting blends for our shaders. I'm creating shaders. I am optimizing levels. I am doing modeling sometimes, world building, like all this stuff. And then when we have time, we'll go make some textures. Like, so a lot of people will come into the industry too specialized sometimes. I remember there was one artist in particular came right out of school, and their first day I went over to introduce myself, and all they talked about was how excited they were to just use Substance Designer all the time. And I was like, oh no, like you're not going to get to do that as much as you're assuming you will.
It almost sounds kind of like you're saying that it's still really important to really understand the nuts and bolts, and be able to work in the nuts and bolts of sort of like how modeling and texturing all comes together, and how that sort of works. Like Substance Designer, some of these others are like kind of high level tools that are great for refinement, but it's not, are you kind of saying that you still really need to kind of understand these kind of fundamental lower level?
Yeah, I think that's what makes a really good environment artist, is an understanding of all the disciplines that goes into it, even if you specialize on one of them. And all the best artists that I've known have a really, really good innate understanding of what makes a good environment, and then the technical stuff can come later. Like, as long as you know the fundamentals, and like even like fine art skills and stuff like that, which is something I'm still learning myself. But there is a reason that concept artists can pick up ZBrush and be better than most 3D artists almost immediately. It's infuriating. Like, if you give a concept artist ZBrush, they will make cooler stuff than you after like a couple weeks, because they just have such a good understanding of forms and shapes and color, and like just the essential foundational aspects of art. And the same goes for environment art. So if you want to be an environment artist, in 95% of cases, you need to have those the base to like build upon. So you need to know what makes a good environment, and then you can figure out the tools that you need to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. That's not saying that you can't get jobs or be successful really specializing in something, but it's a lot more rare. So like this guy or these guys, like, you could go find work where all you do is Substance Designer, but it's very rare. I did some freelance for like gametextures.com before, and like that was literally just make some materials and stuff. And then in terms of like character art, if you go work on like Blockbuster movies, or if you work at like the R&D department at Sony or something, they will have positions where it's like, okay, you just make hair for characters. Like, that's it. Like, you just become really, really good at making hair, and that's all you'll ever do. So that kind of stuff does exist. But if you're trying to land the general job of an environment artist at or a character artist, this applies to all these things, at a AAA studio or a mid-sized studio or something like that, you just need those core skills, and you need to build upon that with your knowledge of other programs. It's the same for effects artists. Our effects artists are really good effects artists, but they also know how to work in Maya. They know how to like take a scene from us and work with it. Yeah, I could go on and on about that, but I think I made my point.
No, that's great. That's great.
There's a
I
question.
have a question. Yeah. So in your experiences, how important is it how often or what percentage of your job involves doing any level of implementation of what you do as an artist into the engine that you're working in? Or
Yeah. So, how often are we actually putting our art into the engine?
yeah, either
Yeah.
not even necessarily final implementation, but I just want to, yeah, can you talk about that a little bit? Right? Do you implement, or do you do test implementations before handing off the final assets as part of an iterative process? Any of that stuff. How good at your engine are you expected to be as an artist?
I think now, I think in most cases, unless I'm forgetting something, environment artists will always be the ones working directly in engine. So you will take things from the designer block out, or from scratch in some cases, and you'll see it through the whole way, from creation to final end game. And it depends on the engine that you're working on. Some studios, so if you're using something like Unreal, a lot of studios use Unreal, and obviously that's something students can get and work in, and that's what most people use to practice with. You'll work inside of Maya, Max, whatever, and then obviously import all your stuff, set up your world, do all the set dressing. Some places are a little bit different with proprietary engines. So like Naughty Dog, we don't have a separate engine. It's a little weird, which kind of threw me off when I first got in the industry, that whole concept, because I always worked with UDK or Unreal. So you would export to a separate program. For Naughty Dog, like Maya is our engine. So yeah, it's a kind of a weird concept. So we don't have an external engine program. So we build our scenes inside of Maya, and then under the hood with all our engineers and tech artists setting up, like, for lack of a better term, our engine, our Maya scenes are our levels. So we'll organize everything within Maya, and then we have some other proprietary programs that link to Maya, and we'll like set up level loading and streaming and scripting and all of that. But yeah, there's no concept of like exporting from Maya into Unreal at our studio, and I know that's the same at some other studios. It really depends. But yeah, to answer your question, it is pretty much standard now that we'll see it all the way through, implement it ourselves, and then work on performance and optimization and stuff along with our tech artists and engineers.
I was actually going to say, I also, even though I'm just the lead artist and like the 2D artist, I also do implementation at my job. Thankfully for my case, it wasn't, I knew like the basics of Unity. And so now I know it a lot more now that I have to do actual implementation. But I would say that no one should have to fret over knowing an engine really well off the bat. It's more one of those, it is just another tool. So it's one of those things of like, you learn as you go sort of deal. So if you just know the basics, you know how to put things into a scene, that's good. Just if you know how to make your art look decent in engine, then that's good as a starting point.
Yeah, that's a good point. The technical skills are easier to pick up than the foundational skills, and like you will not be. There's no way a studio can expect you to know how to use their tools before you start. So you'll learn so much on the job. Like, as long as that's why they send you art tests. They're testing your core skills, and once you get the job, they will have training on site for how to use their tools and stuff. So as long as you understand core concepts, like if as a student you download Unreal or Unity and you understand the whole process of like starting an asset to final scene in game, those skills will transition over to any pipeline, really.
Yeah.
That's super helpful. Because that's definitely something that we push, and it's not always something that students grasp onto. They sometimes kind of go, well, I'm just the artist. My work is done once I export an FBX.
Yeah,
So it's
that
great to
is.
hear. It's nice to hear
Yeah,
that.
if you're in house, that is not the case. You will.
Yeah.
And even if that was the case, it is good to know how to do it anyway in case you have to solve problems.
Yep.
The only time you will not, I won't say the only time because obviously there's probably some weird edge cases I'm forgetting. The majority of the time that you won't add stuff into engine yourself is if you work for an outsourcing studio, which is pretty common. So like all AAA studios, including Naughty Dog, will work with many, many, many outsourcing studios, which is also kind of weird when you're first starting because that's not really something they tell you in school. Like when I first started, I was like, seriously, like we don't even make most of the art ourselves. And as I'm going on, and now I'm here, I'm like, oh, thank God we don't make most of the art ourselves. It's kind of switched over. So like we'll send. We have a whole team of artists that are just outsource managers. So they understand the pipeline, but they don't make the art themselves. They work with all our contractors. So if my modeler and I need an asset for our level, we will write up a little document with some reference and be like, these are the technical specifications we need. This is what it should look like. This is like where it's going to go on our level. We'll send it to the outsourcing team and they'll communicate that out to whatever artist is available. And then as they're working on it, they'll send us updates like, here's the high poly, here's the textures, here's the UVs. And we'll like, oh, you should change this. This needs to look different. It should be bigger, smaller. And then once it's done, then that is a case where they'll just give us the final model. And then like me or my modeler will put it all together and put it into the engine in game. But yeah, even there, if they understand how our engine works, they can create things properly. So I can't think of any reason that someone learning should not know how to put stuff into an engine. In any case, it's always helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah.
I saw the question said, you mentioned a program called Houdini. What kind of program is that? It's the first time I've heard of it. Houdini is, and it's been around for a while, but over the last few years, it's gotten a lot more popular. It's like really, really blowing up, especially with the, I
don't even know what I know what you're talking about. I don't even know what the word is.
With like how popular proceduralism is becoming with Substance Designer, and since games are getting bigger and bigger, and it's just almost impossible to make all the art unique and custom, everything is becoming procedural. So Houdini it started as an effects program, so for making all kinds of particle effects and things like that, and it's still used for that, but it's turned into more of a content creation tool for modeling, for texturing, for physics simulations, anything like that. And I think the simplest way to explain it in terms of environment art is it is Substance Designer for modeling. In the same way that you can take all these nodes and procedurally tie them together to output a result non-destructively. So like, and if you note it down, John, I can send you information on Houdini and stuff too. Sure. So for instance, really easy example, Houdini you could use for like, instead of hand modeling a city in a game, the Spider-Man PS4 game, the entire city is Houdini. Instead of hand modeling everything, the artists can build tools in Houdini that you specify some base rules. Like, here is the footprint of a building that I want. It needs to be this tall. It needs to have this amount of windows, blah, blah, blah. Create a Houdini tool that procedurally takes all that information in and spits out a result. And then from there, you have like a base to work with. And that is just like such a base level explanation of what it is. It is such a powerful tool. I don't know if you guys know like Horizon Zero Dawn for PS4. Their entire environmental world building system is Houdini, like the entire thing. So their artists would just define like, I want a mountain here and I want it to be snowy, and then go. and it creates a mountain. It goes into their asset library. It's like, these are all the snowy plants, and it like populates them out in a realistic way. Here's the road. Here's the railings. Here's the wires and stuff. It's a little hard to explain if you don't actually see it, but like once you see, they put out some videos on how they do this kind of stuff. Once you like see it in action, it'll really start to make sense, how it can be used. And I would cautiously recommend people like students starting to look into Houdini. And I say cautiously because out of any program I've ever used, it has the highest learning curve. It is a very complex program. Like, it's really complicated. And it can involve like some scripting and programming if you want to get the most out of it. But I would still recommend it because I think it's like going to be the next big thing in the terms of like, over the last few years, a lot of studios are looking for substance designer artists. And if you know substance designer really well, you will find a job. I think that's what Houdini is going to be. Like, if you know Houdini really well, you will find a job. Like, no question.
It's interesting. It almost sounds like game production in some ways is like moving, or at least in terms of the big studios, it's like akin to before the Industrial Revolution, when people were like, you know, custom making things in a little craft shop, right? The craftsman, and individually making stuff, as opposed to like new ways of sort of scaling up, you know, sort of being able to kind of mass produce, but with variety, right? In a way that for much larger games, like sort of increasing the efficiency. Yeah, it just seems like the tools and the processes kind of changed a little.
The entire industry is moving that way. You see it with substance designer. Everything is becoming procedural. You always see the joke of like, oh, well, we won't even need artists at some point if everything is just like done procedurally, which is not the case. It is absolutely not the case. But everything is moving that way, so you can make more stuff faster because games are getting so big. You saw it even over the last, since I started working in the industry. When I was in school, the biggest thing was ZBrush. Everybody was learning ZBrush. That's when Naughty Dog was putting out tutorials on ZBrushing, like brick tiling textures and stuff. And that's what everybody was learning. And they're like, you have to know this if you're going to be a texture artist. And nobody does that anymore. Like, because they realize, they're like, these games are so big, we literally don't have the time for an artist to sit in ZBrush and destructively create these tiling brick textures. If you need to, if you finish your texture and you're like, oh, well, actually, I need more bricks in this, it is almost impossible to go back and fix that. So in comes substance designer. You finish a brick wall material and you're like, I need more bricks. Oh, okay. I go to the first node and I just add more bricks and it all updates and I have a new finished result. That saves so much time, and that concept is bleeding into every facet of game dev. Even like a lot of our gameplay systems, which I can't really talk about, but it's not just us, it's other studios too. Even gameplay stuff is becoming procedural. So instead of like hand placing custom collision everywhere, it's like you define a set of rules. If a crate is this big by this big, that sort of thing, then you know that this animation will play or this sound effect will play or anything like that. So yeah, I could go off on a tangent with that, but essentially getting in early on things like that could be very beneficial if that's something you're interested in.
Okay. Sorry.
Sorry, there was one other there was a question that came up. I just wanted to answer very quickly. For a student that doesn't have the art school classes, could you recommend any sources to supplement their 3D education and help them learning after leaving college? There are a lot of really good tools. ArtStation actually has a learning program where it's just like individual tutorials that are done by industry professionals you could look at. There are Gumroad is really good too. I would recommend just finding artists that you really like and seeing if they have any tutorials. And then the best tool, honestly, is to just do studies of things that you that you personally like. So if you really like, I don't know, some photographer, and you just really love the compositions that they always get, just literally make it. You don't have to post this anywhere. You don't have like you don't have to show this off because you're kind of just doing someone else's work. But for you as an artist to literally just do a study of it, you will pick stuff up as you recreate it. That goes for every discipline, for every single person as an artist. Just do studies. Like for me, one of the hardest things to draw as a artist is actually hands, because you spend so much time looking at your hands. It's very easy to know when they look wrong. So doing a lot of hand studies is really important to me. I'm a lot better at drawing hands from scratch now, but I still do hand studies all the time, just so that I keep that library fresh.
That's so interesting. I just with my own work, my mom is an artist and taught fine arts for a long time, and it's funny. I still regularly show her just to get feedback, and like the things she's like pretty consistently critical of are the hands that I create. She's always pointing out it's the wrong size. No, go back and redo that. So that's funny. It's interesting to hear that. I want to be respectful of your time, because we're already over. So I don't know. Maybe do we have room for one more like quick question? Or
I mean, honestly, I'm around as long as you guys are around.
I usually don't start work till 12.
Oh, that's right.
Nothing else going on. I could talk about this stuff forever. So, like, whatever time you want.
Well, we really, really appreciate this. Thank you. No, I will. Maybe we'll do. We'll see if anybody has another question or so. Actually, I thought it was kind of interesting. What you maybe you could just tell everybody else. We were talking about just how you guys have made the transition with this current, the current pandemic, how you had to work remotely and stuff. I thought it was kind of interesting. Maybe you can just describe a little bit how this has affected the way you're working. And I don't know if you have any insight on maybe whether this will change, like how people working remotely, or maybe that's not possible. Maybe that will never be possible in the same way. But I thought it would be kind of interesting for you to mention that.
I mean, so for me, well, in terms of our transitioning, we live together, so I have company all the time. So it's been fine, and we get along very well. Obviously, not dating. How dare you? But in terms of wondering about working remotely, I am an advocate for getting people that can't live in places like California work, because everybody's always like, you have to have experience, but how do you get experience if you're not in California? So I personally always try to hire contract artists that are out of state, but there's definitely something different about having artists in-house. I cannot get the same level of like, whether it be candidness or best advice, or be able to do like immediate paint overs, give immediate advice and feedback. There's a lot of stuff that's missing when you do work remotely. And as an artist that's now working from home, I already feel that. I usually work very closely with my engineers, and I have 2 engineers. The fact that I can't literally bother them all hours of the day is very frustrating for me. I'm sure it's nice for them, but it's definitely hard to work from home all the time. I honestly, I wouldn't count on studios opening up more remote positions, to be honest. But that being said, there are places that do hire contract artists, and places like outsourcing studios are really, really good for that. Most of them have outsourced or contract artists that are out of or not in-house.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting for me from a bigger studio. It was actually really impressive when they told us that we had to work from home, how quickly they got everything together. Our IT team, I think we had like 300 something people that they needed to get things set up for. And it went pretty smoothly. Within a few days, they had everybody set up so I could work from my home computer and we just VPN in. So like use a remote desktop and log into like a secure VPN. I can't say for sure how well it would have worked for full production because luckily when this started, we were wrapping up production on our latest project. So it was already winding down and we were really just doing like bugs and polish fixes. So it wasn't a ton of work to begin with. I can just guess based on how that's been going that doing full production would have been really difficult.
Yeah.
Because even just doing the bug fixes and stuff, it was relied on the VPN's connection, on your own internet connection, that sort of thing. And now they're gonna start having us like try to bring home our own dev kits and computers from the studio to like ease that process a little bit more. I would say I agree with her. I don't think this will change much for bigger studios because it is just ultimately so much easier to have everybody in house at the same time working on stuff together. It's the best way for communication and efficiency. But the fact that they showed that it is possible to work from home if necessary, I think will be a positive thing in edge cases where like maybe somebody had a family emergency and had to be home for a bit, and it shows that they can work from home. They don't have to like use all their PTO or take a leave or something like that, or
Yeah.
any like sort of remote edge case like that. I think this experience will be really helpful for because now we have the infrastructure to support it. For studios like Naughty Dog, I don't think it'll open up. They're not going to just like start instantly hiring people to work from home all the time because it's still very much a collaborative process that works best when you're all together in the same building.
Hmm.
There was a question for you, Sean, about work environment feel.
Oh, smaller studios. What was the? Oh yeah, I never came back around to that. What was the work environment like? Naughty Dog or EA? Yeah. So at the bigger studios, and even on bigger studios, it varies place to place. And I know so many people at other studios, so I have some insight into what it's like for them. Bigger studios, in general, I love the environment at all of them. It really comes down to personal preference too. That's one thing to keep in mind when I'm like giving my answer to this, because I know some people just hate bigger studios when I kind of like it. I'd say the biggest difference between bigger and smaller studios is your sense of ownership and influence over a game. If you are working at EA or Ubisoft or something like that, you are working on a project with sometimes 1,000 other people, which can be daunting, and sometimes it can lead to a feeling of, like, does my work even matter, or is it getting recognized, or is it making a big impact, which can kind of suck sometimes, and that's a lot of people will be like, I'd rather go work at a smaller place where I have feel like I have a much bigger influence over a game. So like at EA, even though I really liked my team and my producers and stuff, it was frustrating at times that we'd be working on a game with 3 other EA studios, and communication was hard. Sometimes people didn't know who was doing what, and things could get muddled up. And also, there's a lot of executive influence at EA. So that mixed with lots of producers, I always joke that it's like, oh, can I move this rock a foot to the left in this level? well, let me go ask 10 different people so I can get permission for it. I do want to put out, because it's a common misconception online in general, that EA is horrible to work for. They are not horrible to work for. EA treats their employees very, very well.
I also just want to say they don't just treat their employees very well. I was also treated very well, and I didn't work there. They had a great gym. So
I'll just put out that disclaimer. I think the biggest complaints you can have for EA if working for them is their man, how do I even explain this? It's just the scope of their projects and how they try to handle it in multiple studios gets out of hand sometimes, like is what I was just saying. So they have a tendency to, like, they'll have one big project that is coming out soon. So they'll take all their other studios and throw it on the project to get it done, which then has a trickle down effect to those projects because they got pulled off of them. And it's just constantly like putting out the next fire of like trying to get something done. But yeah, the sense of the ownership is not as good as it could be in a lot of cases when you work at bigger studios, because it sounds cliche, but you'll just feel like a cog in the machine sometimes. You'll just get a task and you're like, okay, I did it. Where is this being used? I don't even know, sort of thing. That can vary. Naughty Dog as a AAA studio is a lot different, and I appreciate this about them in the terms of ownership that you get. We don't work with other studios on the major aspects of the game. So like EA would be splitting a game between studios where like one studio would take like 3 whole levels and just do the entire thing, or they take whole systems and do the entire thing. So you'd have a problem sometimes of like styles being different, or like these weird disconnects. So at Naughty Dog, we do the whole game in-house. We just outsource basically props and set dressing sort of things. And that's really cool. This is honestly the most ownership I've had at a AAA studio. The sense of responsibility is a lot bigger. So they will literally, and some would argue this actually goes too far in the other direction sometimes, where some artists like being given a strict list of like tasks. I'm like that myself sometimes.
I am one of those people.
Danielle is like that, where they really need to know exactly what needs to be done. And I struggle with that sometimes myself too, because I like having a nice organized list. Naughty Dog goes the other direction, where they're known for not having producers. So our producers are my lead environment artists. They will take the game, break it into sections, into levels, and they will assign that to a modeler texture team. And they will literally say, here's the level, here's the concepts, this is when it needs to be done, go. And that's all they tell you, essentially. And then it's up to you to have the personal responsibility and communication skills to talk to concept artists, the art directors, your level designers, that sort of thing, and just get it done, which is daunting sometimes, not having that direction, but it's also really freeing, and it feels good to have that sense of influence and ownership over a game. So you coming from like, oh, can I move this rock? Let me ask everybody, to like, oh God, like I can make this, as long as it follows the concept, I can do whatever I want here. As long as it runs, follows the concept, and supports the gameplay, like it's up to you. Can be daunting, but it's really cool to like in the finished product be like, oh yeah, that was completely me. Like that was all my idea, sort of thing. You get that, bringing it back to like smaller studios. That is the sort of thing you get at smaller studios. So between EA and Naughty Dog, I worked, like I said, at a very small startup with some ex-EA people. And it was me and one other guy were the environment artists. And everything in the environment was up to us, which was the first time I had experienced that. And it was really cool having a sense of ownership. But the downfalls of that is everything's up to you.
I was just going to say.
You can't split the responsibility. And also, along with the smaller studios, generally comes a lack of resources, which isn't great sometimes. So EA, Naughty Dog is like, hey, can I get a substance license? I go, yeah, sure. Like here, we have hundreds of them. Smaller studios, hey, can I get a substance license? Maybe in a year when we have the money for it, like that sort of thing. You have to make do with other stuff.
Interesting.
That's also where the jack of all trades comes in as well, is the lack of resources. So that's one of those things of like, it's not something I ever aimed for. I never aimed to learn how to do implementation into Unity as a 2D artist. I never learned how to do level design. I never learned how to do UI art. I wasn't planning on doing any of these things. But because we do not have the resources to hire those people, I had to learn how to do them. So that is a common issue in small studios.
Interesting.
Also, being the owner of all of the art also has its flaws, in the sense of if it looks bad, it's your fault. So that's also very daunting. So it's sometimes nice to be another person out of 1,000, and everybody made it look bad, not just you.
I just I saw Jeff just posted something.
I had another question too, but we can cover Jeff's.
Sure. Okay, yeah, Christian,
Or-
we'll go.
or I can just say it like if so you have no producer. So do you have other formalized ways that either imposed by Naughty Dog or EA or just within your own group of sort of maintaining production status on a project? So do you work with Trello? Do you do like Scrum or Daily Stand Up or Kanban or other agile implementation or anything like that?
Yeah, so we have a few different things that we use. We do, so technically Naughty Dog does have, we have producers, but I think we have like 2, if that, where other studios will have like 2 producers per discipline at like or more. So we have like 2 who will, I never personally interface with them or interact with them. EA, I would like talk to producers every day, like that sort of thing. So this one at Naughty Dog, they kind of stay in the background. They'll like attend meetings and stuff, and they are there to just keep a general framework and have an idea of what's going on. And sometimes they will help assign out like deadlines, but they're not like, unlike other studios, they're not there like doing specific tasks like make this tree, make this whatever. They'll just be like, okay, I know this team is working on this level. Here's when it needs to be done. In addition to that, it can be up to the individual pair. That's part of the like freedom and responsibility. This is Naughty Dog specifically. So I like to use Trello a lot of times for myself just to organize my thoughts, or I'll use OneNote is a pretty good one too, just to keep track of things that I need to do. Every day I'll go over and I'll talk with my modeler. That's how we start our mornings. We'll just like grab a coffee and run through the level, the newest build, and talk about what needs to be done. I think once or twice a week we were doing it, where you would gather together with everybody who has a stake in the level. So it'd be the artists, the lighters, the effects artist, the designer, the art director. You would all gather around someone's dev kit and play through the level and talk about things. And then you would sometimes get a little bit more of a structured schedule from your environment leads, depending, like if it's later towards a project and you don't have all the time in the world, then they have to sort of manage things a little bit more. But other than that, at Naughty Dog, a lot of it comes down to the personal responsibility of talking to everybody else, deciding what needs to be done, and it's up to you how you track that. At other studios, and we do have an internal task software, so we can list out tasks, but it's mostly used for bugs. But you can put actual tasks in there. If like a designer, that's another big use for it. If a designer is playing through the level and they're like, oh, this needs to be changed, they can enter a task just so they know that it gets done and it's not going to lead to any problems. But things like at other studios, things like Jira are used a lot for tasks and bugs. Things like
GitHub,
and I think Jira is the main one that we used. other than the proprietary in-house stuff at Naughty Dog, I think Jira might be one of the most popular ones.
Okay.
But yeah, things like Trello, even if you're doing your own personal project, Trello boards are awesome. They're really good.
So maybe Christian will end with one last question. Christian, you said you had a question?
Yeah, it's a minor one, but Dani, you mentioned ArtStation, and I noticed both of you have easily findable art stations. You have websites with your names. You have a sturdy online presence, and I'm wondering what if you had to engineer that, if you did when that started, how much effort you put into making that known, that sort of stuff, like engineering those Google results.
So
Or if it just
first
happens.
off, I want to say this is a great final question because I wanted to bring up one thing that's a huge pet peeve of mine. Guys, please don't use Wix. Please, please don't use Wix. It is not mobile friendly. Half of the time when I'm looking at artists, it's on the go. And you know, it doesn't work great on mobile. Just don't use Wix. Just don't. Unless you pay for it. Like I know that the paid version is a little bit better, but I recommend using something else. For me, my online presence has been a longer road than Sean's, just because way back in the day when DeviantArt was the main place for every artist to sit at, that's where I was. So I have had an online presence since I was like 11, and posting my art. But I wouldn't say I actually haven't had to do anything for SEO or engineering my results. It is more so I kind of, since I use my name, Dani Kruse, and that's not even my full name. Obviously, my full name is Danielle, but using that consistently across every single platform is actually what makes me appear consistently. So there are other artists that will use like a username in one place, a different username in another place, and then their full name and just their portfolio. I don't do that. My Twitter, my old Tumblr, I don't use that anymore. ArtStation, my WordPress, like literally everything uses Dani Kruse. So I would make sure that your branding is consistent. I do also recommend if you want to have a good online presence to make sure you post often, and engage with people. Um, for a portfolio, I would say ArtStation is is necessary at this point. To be honest, even if you don't use it for your initial portfolio, um, most people will immediately look for you on ArtStation, if you're looking for a job. And honestly, it's so easy to use. All you have to do is upload art. That's really it. That takes care of the rest. Um, if you want to use ArtStation for your portfolio, they do have their actual portfolio system. That's what I use now. If you don't want to, you know, things like WordPress are really good. And just don't use Wix. that's my recommendation.
Yeah. I could go on forever about this topic. So ArtStation, definitely you have to have an ArtStation if you're being an artist. If you want to be an artist in the industry. And like when I was in school, we had whole classes on like building your website, like out of CSS and HTML and all that stuff. That's not a thing anymore. Unless you're trying to get hired as a web designer, nobody cares. Like seriously. Nope.
Like,
if you're trying to get what's up?
I was gonna say if you want to do that because you find that fun, go for it.
Yeah.
Do it for yourself, but don't do it in the hopes of like, look, I made my own website. No one cares.
Yeah. In terms of and again, this applies to most artistic disciplines. I'm just speaking from environment art because that's what I do. Say you want to be an environment artist. I'm telling you right now, nobody cares about anything other than your name and big images of your work. That's it. Like, you don't have to worry about all this other stuff. Like, just get. This is less of a problem now because so many people use ArtStation. But I'm telling you, like, when I was in school and like a few years afterwards, people's portfolio websites were insane. And there would be like splash pages or like click to enter or like here's a big picture of my face, click here to see all my work. And I'm telling you, that's not really a case anymore, but recruiters or art directors who have 5 minutes to look at something, they will immediately close it. Immediately. So when they have time to look at stuff, that's why ArtStation is so good. It's got your name, it's got your basic info, and like here's all your art in a very standardized format, which is also important because they don't have time to figure out how to work 20 different website layouts. If they can just click open your art and just browse through it, that is all they need. So that is by far like the easiest. Upload your art, make sure it's presented nicely, make sure all your art has at least your name on it or your email. Again, this is less of an issue now with ArtStation, but it's still important. This was more of a thing years ago when art directors or recruiters would save artwork. If your name isn't on it, how will they ever remember like who did it? But that's still probably just a good safety net. Like put some info on the images you present. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, maybe you guys don't have to worry about this, but in my experience of hiring artists, there has been more times than there should have been where someone doesn't actually have a portfolio and instead they link me their either personal Tumblr or personal Twitter that has their art on it, but I don't want to dig through your media tab and see all the GIFs that you post while looking for your art. So ArtStation is free. Like really just do yourself a favor and have an ArtStation. And when the next big portfolio site comes out, make it. Like whatever it is next, do it immediately. Never link something like I'll probably find your Twitter. I will absolutely look for it. Don't link it to me. Let me find it.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Tiny follow up on that. Sweet spot in terms of like amount of art or number of images that you would like to see. Like how little is too little, and how much is like it'll never get seen.
So in terms of projects, quality over quantity every time.
Yeah.
Every time. I would say at minimum, this can really vary, but I'd say at minimum, I would say
5.
I don't know.
I would say 5. If you have less than 5 things on your portfolio, I'm curious.
Yeah, it's hard to say though, because it depends on discipline too. So like, say you're an environment artist.
Yeah, so it's like a whole.
If you have like 2 or 3 really good environments, that includes so much stuff, like lots of models, lots of textures. So you could have like 2 or 3 really good environments. If you're leaning towards texture art, have like 1 or 2 like environments to show that you know how to be an environment artist, but then have like additional like one-off materials and shaders and stuff. But yeah, I'll see a lot of texture artists on ArtStation. They'll have like 20, 30 substance designer materials. I'm not one to talk, by the way. Like my portfolio is so outdated. It is so outdated. Anyway, if I were to update it, they have like 20, 30 materials, but they're all kind of lower quality. They just like knock them out in a day or so. If they pared that down, took the ones they liked, really dug into them and knocked out like really high quality stuff, but only had like 5 or 6 of them, I would like that much more than just having like 5 times the amount at lower quality.
Yeah. I was also going to say I wouldn't necessarily look at my portfolio either because I'm not currently trying to be hired. So I do like to post my art online. So I use my portfolio now as a little bit more of just like, hey guys, if you like my art, here's my art. Just like a place to put it. Not, hey, here's my art, please hire me. There are 2 very big differences between them. So yeah, when I was looking for work, I think I had like maybe, this is for concept art, I think I had like maybe 10 pieces in my portfolio total. I do still regularly out of my portfolio take out old stuff as I make new stuff, just because the worst thing in your portfolio will always bring the whole thing down. So always just take stuff out. The second you're like, you know what, that's not good anymore, just get rid of it. Just take it off. You can leave it other places, like on your Twitter and personal places, but don't put it on your portfolio if you're trying to get hired.
So. All right.
Good to know. Thank you very much, both of you.
Yeah.
And I can add to that if you have another minute. I
Yeah,
think
absolutely. Yeah. No, I'm more concerned. we were taking so much.
No, it's fine. I took the morning off. I was like, yeah, I'll appear at like 2. It's fine.
I don't have any bugs to finish, so I'm good right now.
Yeah.
I would like to stress how important networking is in getting a job. It's other than the work itself, is the single most important thing is your networking. The industry is so small. The amount of people who get jobs because they know somebody at a studio is crazy. I've gotten the majority of my jobs because my work is good and somebody at the studio knows me.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of my strongest skills in school and coming out of school is I was really good at networking, and that was mostly because of Polycount. I don't know if you guys know of Polycount still. It's not as big as it used to be. But polycount.com is a forum that's been around since 2000. And back when I was in school, like 9-10 years ago, that was a forum where it was just mostly active artists in the industry. And they would just go on there and they would post art and answer questions. And then it was also a place for students to go and seek help and post their art and stuff too. And it was a really nice little community, and I became really involved with that. And through that, I made so many friends and contacts and stuff that to this day still helps me. I know so many people online just through Polycount throughout the industry working at the biggest studios. But like a good example, I got the job at Liquid Development doing outsourcing was through a Polycount post because I was active online. They saw something I had posted, a work in progress, like hard surface project on the forums, and they messaged me and they're like, we have a hard surface project coming up. Do you want to work for us? I got my first full-time job out of school through Polycount. And this should stress how important networking is. I was fresh out of school and I got a full-time job at a big studio, and they paid my relocation from Pennsylvania to San Francisco. That almost never happens for someone fresh out of school. But that happened because I was in a Polycount Skype group, and the lead character artist from that studio said, we need an environment artist. Is anyone interested? And I said, yeah. And I knew him through Polycount. He knew my work and stuff. And because of that, instead of going through the hiring process, where if they see somebody on the other side of the country, they'll just automatically be like, probably not. He took my portfolio and gave it directly to the art recruiters. And they're like, oh, okay, we'll actually look at this one. And then that led to me getting the job. And from there, it's just been a constant string of connections. So they had some layoffs at Tryon Worlds. So I was let go from there with like a whole bunch of other people, which sucked. And I was like, oh, what am I going to do? And then I supported myself for the next year on freelance jobs from people that I met online. And then I got into Visceral from an ex-Tryon employee plus some Polycount guys. So if you start networking now, throughout your entire career, those connections will just snowball and build up on each other. Before you know it, years from now, you'll be like, oh my God, I know so many people in the industry. And it's helpful, and it's almost like a safety net where if something goes wrong, you're looking for a job or something, you have all these connections, you have all these possible avenues that you can take. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm glad you made the point also that the networking didn't like happen after you finished at school. Or after
you got to get started.
Because I think a lot of people a lot of students they sometimes think, well, I'll start networking once I've graduated, once I have produced work that I feel is good enough to allow me to network. But that's
I mean, to be fair, you're all networking now.
Yeah.
Not just between me and Sean, but like between yourselves.
Mm.
I mean, the people that I went to school with, Sean, Jeremy, Max, Alyssa, they are, I mean, they're like my closest friends still to this day. And I know that if I ever need a recommendation, they have my back. So like you all as classmates, you're networking now. I do want to stress though about networking because this is something I've seen and I know Sean has seen. I won't say any names, but there is quality to networking. Don't just like introduce yourself and just try to get to know as many
Don't-
people as possible.
Don't just use people.
Yeah, it is very obvious when that's what you're doing. These connections that you make, it should be meaningful. So most artists, I mean, if you, for instance, if you ask like, oh, could you like, I really like your work, could you look at my portfolio and give me any feedback? Most artists will happily do that. And that's like a good way to network. Also, as long as you actually listen to their feedback, but it's very noticeable. Like if you ask for questions on something in your portfolio and then you don't actually follow through, and it's like, did you actually want to talk to me, or were you just trying to, show face? So make sure the connections you make are actually meaningful. Don't just try to say, oh, I know everybody for the sake of knowing everybody. If no one's actually your friend, those networking that's not going to help you still. They are actual friendships.
I notice, looking back that your group of friends, and the people that you mentioned are working in industry, I definitely see like a consistency. And I mean, like, all of you of course are extremely talented, but also just like friendly, nice people. Anyone would enjoy hanging out with. And I think that like it really, and I know I've talked about this with some other faculty members too, that like just for better or worse, you have to put yourself out there. You have to kind of make the effort to get out there, get to know people, meet people. It's not, unfortunately, it's not enough just to be incredibly talented, but to also be able to kind of, to just put yourself out there, I think.
The industry is so small, insanely small. Like, your work is very important, but so is your personality. You could be. I'm not going to say that there aren't some questionable people that get jobs. You'll run into them just like any industry. But for the most part, if your work is really good, but you're just kind of like not a great person or easy to work with, that becomes known very fast, and that will spread. I like it. The game dev. It sounds cliche, but it is such a small world in the game dev community. If somebody is kind of burns their bridges at one studio, other studios will hear about it. For an example, all the Sony studios are really close. So Naughty Dog and Insomniac and Sony Santa Monica and all this stuff like shares so many employees going back and forth between studios. Everybody knows each other. So if somebody at Insomniac does something, like you start hearing like, oh, they so and so did this and this, they're not, like, I don't know, they're kind of really hard to work with. They'll never work at Naughty Dog ever. Like, it's just that tight knit of a group.
Yeah.
So when you're out networking, it really just comes down to just like be a good person. Don't just be genuine. Go on these forums, make sure you have like a Twitter presence or Instagram or anything like that, and just be friendly, give feedback to people. If you post stuff, like, thank people for their feedback. It's really that simple. Like, and I had another point I wanted to make. Oh, you mentioned earlier, this is semi-related. You mentioned earlier people will wait until they have something that's good enough to show before they show it. That is one of my biggest problems as an artist.
Oh my.
I'm a perfectionist. That's why I never update my portfolio. I have so many projects that I start and I never post. And that is one of my biggest flaws. And one of my biggest pieces of advice is, even if you don't think it's great or it's not done, go online and post it to like forums or like Polycount or something, and be like, hey, this is what I'm doing. Can I get some feedback on it? So that was like invaluable in school for me. Is I would post in progress stuff, and professional artists who are literally working at the places I wanted to work on would tell me how to do it better. And that's like some of the best feedback that you could possibly get. So don't wait, just go on, get some feedback, take that in consideration. That's how you get better. And then also through that interaction, that's how you network and make these connections. So if somebody, and I'll remember these people, and this goes for other artists too. If somebody asks me for feedback, I'll remember them because they asked me for feedback, because I'll tell you that is very rare. With the amount of people trying to get into studios as artists, it's insane how many of them don't put their work out there. You cannot get hired if people don't know who you are. You can't just like make a portfolio and be like, okay, that's it. Like, and hope somebody stumbles across it. If somebody approaches me or like messages me on ArtStation and is like, here's my work, how can I get better? I will instantly remember them over the majority of people because I had that interaction with them. And then on top of that, if they're super polite and easygoing and like good to talk to, I'll remember that as well. So next time we have like a junior artist position open up, I'll be like, oh, this guy was like really cool to work with, or like this girl like showed that she really wanted to get better. And there you go. I can give your name to a recruiter, and you don't have to sit in the pile of like applications.
I do also want to, in case anyone here is introverted, I do want to ease any minds. I personally am very extroverted. Sean is introverted. Do not let that dissuade you. Do not let you feel like you're going to be at a disadvantage for networking. Most people in the industry are pretty introverted and have like social anxiety and other mental issues. But it no one really cares. Like, it's okay. People are very understanding in the industry because most people are also introverted. So even if things can be awkward, as long as you are, just nice and genuine, that goes a very long way. So don't ever feel like you're at a disadvantage just because you prefer to be quiet and a shut-in.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Danielle. So I think maybe this is a good time to wrap things up. And I want to thank you guys so much for your taking the time out today and talking about your experience. I'm also incredibly happy to see you got how you guys have done, and the work that you've done and how your careers have progressed. So thank you again. We'll hope to be in touch again soon and see what else you guys do. So
yeah, no problem. I love talking about this stuff. I used to do, like I was saying, I used to do this at the Art Institute as well. If you ever want to do something like this again, just let me know.
Oh, love to. Yeah, I would love to.
If there's like a list of things, I completely forgot everything I had talked about over the last 2 hours. If there's a list of things like I mentioned that you'd like more information on, or any links to things, I could easily write up an email and send that to you to like hand out to everybody.
I'll follow up after this. Then I'll go through this again, but I know I have some of the things. I'll follow up with you about those items. So
cool. Okay. Yeah, and if anybody has any other questions or whatever, like feel free. Like John, you could give him my email if you want.
Is that okay?
Or literally, like even like like I just said, networking. If you want to find me on Twitter or whatever, like
Yeah.
just like message me or whatever, and I will be happy to answer any questions or like give you feedback on something.
Perfect.
Like it's. I want to stress that it is not a problem at all, because it is. And again, it's crazy. I've talked to a lot of students over like at GDC or like things like this, and I'll tell them like, if you want feedback on your work, I will be happy to do it. And they're like, oh yeah, I would love that. Like that'd be so great. And then you
And then they
never hear
don't.
from them again.
Yeah.
Which is fine, but I want to stress that it's not bothering me. Like
I don't know if you. I don't know.
We were students too.
Yeah, no, I mean, if at some point you guys are up for even, like, if we have like a critique on a particular project or something, and
Yeah.
we'd love to have you, join us or something, and something like that would also be great. But yeah,
I am always happy to give feedback. Most of my job requires me giving feedback to artists, so
great.
I am more than happy to.
All right, well, thank you again, and hope you guys stay healthy and safe. And
Thank you.
this has been wonderful. So
Thank you so much. Yeah.
yeah.
No problem.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for
Thank you
putting this
very much.
together too. It's cool. I know when I was a student, it was awesome if professors did stuff like this. So that's really cool.
Yeah, agreed. Though it feels weird because it's like, oh, we're not that special.
No,
It feels weird because it reminds me how long I've been out of school, and it sucks.
It's like I still remember some of your projects too. Like I remember, well, Danielle, I don't know if I remember when I think you transferred, right? From the
Yeah, I
Army
did.
to Philadelphia. I remember looking at your portfolio, and I'm like, oh wow, this is like, she's coming in really, really impressive portfolio. And then Sean, I still remember an environment project you did. Was it like an Egyptian, like a Nile kind of river?
Oh yeah,
environment?
yeah. All I remember from your classes was always being too ambitious, trying to do too much, and never finishing it ever. Every time. But I do remember I was obsessed that semester with like, oh, I want to make really cool water. Like that's all I tried to do. Yeah.
Well, I have to say, I'm not surprised that you guys have done well. So
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
all right. Well, we'll talk to you guys again soon. So yeah, or I'll follow up with you. But
All right, awesome. Thanks, guys. Have a good day.
okay.
Bye. You're welcome.
See ya. See you, everyone.
I'll see you guys.
And thank you very much, John, for setting this up.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. I really should. I've been meaning to do it. For a while. We have, it's interesting. There's this group of them that they had mentioned, friends of theirs, and they've done quite well. So yeah, I'm glad we were able to do that. And
Downloading Houdini as we speak.
yeah.
I just have it too.
I will share Sean's. I'll share Sean's email. I mean, they are like super. Yeah. So I think they will be really, really good people to,
keep in contact with.
Yeah, of course.
I'm gonna go continue working on this rough model of a bat.
Yeah.
It's funny, I'm missing my entire level design class, but you know what? I think it's worth it.
Yeah. Well, we're good. For those of you in my class, just continue. We have we're just sort of trying to finish up the project, so you guys can go to that. And if you have any questions or need to reach out to me, just you can do that. So all right.
Yeah.
Glad you guys were able to join though, and I'll post this video too. So
Of course.
all right.
All right.
Awesome.
Yep.
See you around.
Take care.
See ya.
Take care, everyone.
Have a great day.